Were it not for the Space Museum sign on this building in Bonne Terre, Missouri, you'd never guess what's inside. An extensive and impressive collection of space and space-related memorabilia. It's billed as the largest private collection of its kind in the nation.
The collection overran the house and my wife's patience. And finally she said, you know, it was just a natural move to be able to open the museum and share it with the public.
Museum founder Earl Mullins started collecting more than 30 years ago, and he has a lot to show for it. In fact, the hundreds of items on display represent just 1/3 of his inventory. Our tour began at a display of toy ray guns inspired by science fiction films and TV shows.
The oldest that is on display is the 1938 Buck Rogers atomic pistol, and it was made by the Daisy BB Gun Company. Everybody got into the act. All of the commercial manufacturers got into the act and wanted to feed this appetite for space.
Star Trek fans will appreciate this phaser from the late 1960s, and aficionados of Star Wars might recognize the Imperial blaster made a few decades later.
The Space Mobile is one that's very, very rare. We've actually not been able to find another copy of it anywhere. Most people will recognize the Jetsons, the Spaceship Commander spacesuit. And the remarkable thing about this is that there's actually a label on the inside that says that it is made by a revolutionary space-age material, and that space-age material is vinyl, plastic, which we take for granted these days, but at that time, it was kind of cutting edge.
Another gallery is devoted to the early years of the space program. There are portraits of the Mercury 7 astronauts, the first Americans in space, and artifacts from the Mercury and Gemini missions.
There's a lot of museums who covet this particular piece. Is a model of the Mercury spacecraft. That was our first manned spacecraft. It was built by the McDonnell Corporation in St. Louis. And this, if not the first, was one of the first in the evolution of those vehicles that took us to space.
Which brings us to this model of one of the Saturn rockets used to send astronauts to the moon in the Apollo program.
There has never been a larger or more complicated vehicle in the world ever built than the Saturn rocket. The Saturn rocket was 363 feet tall. It weighed 6.5 million pounds, and 6 million pounds of that was fuel.
Models of the International Space Station and the ill-fated Columbia Space Shuttle are on display too. Mullins says the museum is one of 3 agencies in the state of Missouri authorized to receive NASA artifacts. There's even a small section devoted to Soviet spaceflight.
That is a rocket launch key that they used to launch their Vostok and Soyuz rockets. It was just like a automobile key. You would put it in, turn it, and that would enable the circuits and allow the rockets to fly.
But what's that book of Russian poetry doing there?
You'll see a very special signature there, and that's Yuri Gagarin's signature, the first man ever to fly in space.
The Space Museum gets a thumbs up from Lowell Grissom, brother of the late astronaut Virgil Gus Grissom.
Well, I think Earl has done a tremendous job here. He has so many artifacts that people just wouldn't believe would be in a museum of this size. And he's quite an interesting individual to be around. He knows an awful lot about space, and as he says, he's a space cadet.
In the political and public debate over the future of space exploration, Earl Mullins believes wholeheartedly in traversing the final frontier.
Kind of in the words of Jim Lovell. Jim said it wasn't magic that took us to the moon, we just decided to go. We as a nation need to decide to continue to explore and expand and grow, because if we're not going forward, we're going backward. In my opinion, space exploration is the epitome of that reach forward.